Hello ladies and gentlemen. Before the video starts, I'd like to raise awareness on a friend's GoFundMe. Her family restaurant has been going through some hard times and I thought I could help them by raising awareness for it on my own channel. A link to it will be provided in the description. Please donate any amount of money you want or spread awareness for it however you can. I'm not asking for much, just to give a moment of your time to help them out. Any form of help would be deeply appreciated. Thank you. Imagine you're a person whose only purpose in life was violence. A person who was raised and bred by power and conquest. None of the people around you think of you as anything but a weapon. Knowing this about yourself eats away at you for years. Having no control over who you are until you eventually succumb to your fate. Now imagine that you have a lifespan of thousands of years, with that dark and terrible truth eating away at you for eons. You were capable of so much more but were never given a chance. All you can do now is conquer and destroy. It's simply who you are. All you can be, with nothing else keeping you going. Eventually you end up receiving pleasure from it and it's the only thing you understand. Nothing keeps you going except for the next chance to spill blood and take lives. This is the story of the monster of the Viltrum Empire, Conquest. In a previous video I talked about how his appearance in the season 3 finale made him a breakout character in the show. A villain who was nothing short of a colossal imposing threat while challenging the heroes in multiple ways. But the video mostly focused on the fight itself, not really covering anything else about the episode. The purpose of it was to focus on how the battle with Conquest helped breathe new life into the show and reinvigorate it for its 4th season, bringing back so many things that made season 1 so iconic and impactful. There was a certain scene from the episode I wanted to talk about in length, but doing so would have detracted from my analysis of the fight, so I figured I would save it for its own video, and chances are you know which scene I'm referring to.
I am so lonely. All the other Viltrumites are scared of me. No one talks to me. No one wants to be my friend. They think I am unstable. They send me from planet to planet committing atrocities in their name. And as I get better at it, they fear me more and more. I am a victim of my own success. Conquest. I don't even get a real name. Only a purpose. I am capable of so much more, and no one sees it. Some days I feel so alone I could cry, but I don't. I never do. Because what would be the point? Not a single person in the entire universe would care. Take it to your grave.
But before I talk about this in length, I think it's fair to provide some context and lore to help us better understand what it means. Many eons ago, the Viltrum people were working towards perfecting their race by weeding out those they considered weak. By the end of it, the population was cut in half, but they succeeded in their goal. The Viltrum Empire became more powerful than it ever was before. And if you look closely, you may also notice a certain someone who was present during the event. Because of this, the Viltrum Empire came to believe that supreme power was all that mattered, and so they set out to spread their power across the universe, conquering planets by the thousands and subjecting billions to their will. Even after the Scourge virus reduced the remaining number of pure-blooded Viltrumites to 50, they still proved to be a formidable threat. But in spite of all their power, there was still something missing among them. Something that would ultimately lead to their downfall. Something that would only be discovered after Nolan was assigned to take over Earth. One important thing to keep in mind is how Nolan was born after the Purge, when the Viltrumites decided to cut their population in half to reach their full power. So he has no idea what life was like before they became conquerors. All he understood was that this was the way things are and he believed it to be normal. But something changed when he was sent to conquer Earth. He was sent not just to conquer the planet but also to see if Viltrumites are compatible with humans for breeding purposes. This would result in him marrying Debbie Grayson and having a son who they named Mark. At first Nolan tried distancing himself from connecting with his family, only thinking about Mark showing signs of his Viltrum powers. But one day Debbie shows him how to have pride in Mark's accomplishment in a baseball game. She helps him feel immersed in the simple life of being a father and being happy for his son. And so he starts to break free from his detachment from others, expressing genuine emotion for Mark winning the baseball game. It was something that felt alien to Nolan, but something he embraced openly, no longer trying to distance himself from his emotions. For the first time in his life, Nolan allowed himself to be something other than a warrior. He allowed himself to be a family man. He comes to realize there's more to life than just the Viltrum Empire and how to appreciate the little things in it that make it worth living. And from there, he starts to take his duties as a father more seriously, being there to raise Mark and help him grow strong, not as a Viltrumite, but as a person. Even if Mark didn't develop his powers, he still feels happy that he was given a chance to be a part of something bigger than himself, or even Viltrum. But breaking free from his military indoctrination is no simple task, as he still holds those beliefs from thousands of years. His Viltrum side starts to conflict with the feelings for the life he built on Earth, how he genuinely grew attached to his family. He still has a mission to fulfill, and going against the Empire is unthinkable. Over the course of Season 1, and especially the finale, he tries to convince himself that these feelings are insignificant. Even so, you can still see him struggling to come to terms with how human he's become. It's not until Mark tells Nolan that even after everything he's done he still feels love for him, that Nolan really begins to feel the gravity of what he's done. He spent the entire season lying not just to his family, but to himself. He was trying really hard to detach himself emotionally from the life he built on Earth, because deep down he feared how the truth would affect his relationship with Mark and Debbie. It's even heavily implied that Nolan would have been okay with just living a normal life on Earth. But when Mark got his powers, the turmoil started to eat away at him. He still believes that Viltrum is a force of good, but he also can't bring himself to believe that the life he built on Earth was just a ruse. In the end, it was all real, but he comes to that realization too late, and so he abandons his post on Earth, unable to endure the weight of his guilt. Nolan's brief time on Earth and how quickly it brought him to question the Viltrum Empire shows a significant weakness in their culture, but it's also something they need to change for the better. Because the Empire lived by a warrior's code of power and conquest for so long, they had the idea of emotional connection with others knocked out of them. They denied themselves the ability to feel emotion because they saw it as a form of weakness. But what it actually did was make their lives feel empty and devoid of meaning. Because what's left for them after becoming the most powerful empire in the universe? Nothing. They fooled themselves into giving themselves no real purpose in life, only functioning as a single-minded totalitarian state. Nolan was the first one to really break himself from that emptiness. His time on Earth taught him the true value of love and emotion, because these things allow someone to truly feel alive and engage with the world, and it actually becomes a very important key to the undoing of Viltrum's totalitarian ways. After the destruction of their home planet, the surviving Viltrum population is left with no choice but to hide among the people of Earth. Their goal was to save their species from going extinct by living among humanity and secretly repopulating with them. A simple sounding objective, but something ended up happening along the way. Through their interactions with the people on Earth, the Viltrumites adopted emotions such as compassion, empathy, and love for their human companions. With how quickly they changed, it really shows how crucial emotional connections were to Viltrumites, and how deep down it was something they longed for. The facade they put on for so long crumbles away, showing how they were all capable of changing for the better. It makes you wonder about the possibility that maybe Conquest had a chance at reformation. If the others changed so quickly, he should have been capable of the same thing. Maybe, maybe not. Perhaps if he was given the same chance as Nolan, it could have been possible. But that chance has come and gone. And what we're left with now is a man whose mind is so warped from the atrocities he committed that he's embraced the monster he's become, even though he knows how wrong this all is. The way he trauma dumps on Mark during that scene is really telling of the effects Viltrum's corruption had on him. It makes him tragic in a rather unique way, but not the kind of tragic where we want to see him redeemed and reformed into a good guy. Rather, he's tragic in how he could have been good under different circumstances, if he wasn't molded by Viltrum the way he was. But what does this scene really say about his character? Earlier when I was going into the backstory regarding Viltrum, Conquest is actually shown to be among the Viltrumites who engaged in the Purge, meaning that he must have some sort of familiarity with life before the Empire. He might have had things like a connection with other people before they shifted their focus to dominating other planets. So if we contrast that to the present day regarding this scene, we see how deeply and horribly his mind was warped by Viltrum's new culture. The first impression it gives is that Conquest is truly a monster, but it actually starts to take a very disturbing new direction. Normally during these types of situations, the villain would glow to the hero about how superior they are, or rant about how their beliefs are superior. Instead, Conquest is admitting his deepest insecurities to his enemy, confessing his true feelings and how he actually interprets his situation. It's an incredible subversion of the trope. There's just something more terrifying and unsettling about this, where a huge intimidating man is so comfortable to confess his vulnerability when he's about to kill you. It feels much scarier than the usual "I'm awesome or you suck" speech a villain would give in this situation, because it feels more honest and real. And what makes it feel so honest and real is how upfront he is towards Mark. Mark is most likely the only person he's ever admitted this to, the only person he believes would be able to understand him. It makes you wonder why Mark? Of all the people Conquest could have confessed his feelings to, why this lesser half-blood? Well, if we really think about how he interacts with Mark throughout the fight, it's easy to figure out why. In spite of his bloodlust and how set he was on killing him, Conquest couldn't help but feel fascinated by Mark. His first impression of him is that he was determined to fight back, only wanting to hit something as hard as he could. It's a very sharp contrast with Mark's other encounters with Viltrumites so far. Usually he would try to talk them down, trying to reason with them and avoid fighting. And even in situations where he feels he has no choice but to fight, he still feels the need to hold back, because he wants to reject the ideology that his father and the other Viltrumites follow. So the others may have informed Conquest of Mark's weak and fragile spirit. He was probably expecting him to do the whole talking down thing, only to be greeted by an angered Mark who was ready to fight him without hesitation. He gives him a satisfied smirk and a slimy yet delightful remark showing how he's impressed by him. Conquest is actually impressed by Mark's desire to challenge him to a fight, and wonders if he might end up giving him the battle he's been craving for. As the two go back and forth, Conquest expresses his thanks to Mark for providing him with a challenge, the most fun he's had in thousands of years. From that creepy heart-shaped blood bubble he blew in space, to acknowledging Mark's increase in strength, to that creepy speech where he wants to thank Mark for providing him with an opportunity to cut loose, to his cheerful response to Mark threatening him after all the stuff he put him through in this fight. These are all signs that Conquest saw something in Mark that other Viltrumites didn't. In spite of being a mere half-blooded human, he has the heart of a Viltrumite warrior, something that brought him immense joy, an opportunity to do battle with a worthy opponent. But there was also one other thing Conquest commented on before they continued their fight. He notices how desperate Mark was to save Eve after he seemingly killed her. He comments on how unusual this is since other Viltrumites don't have emotional attachments. It's commonly viewed as a form of weakness, and yet Conquest comments on how admirable it is. He tells Mark that he's starting to understand his affinity towards humanity, finding some sort of admiration in how strong his bond with Eve is. In spite of seeing this as weakness, he's shown to have some sort of interest in it, almost like he secretly sought a connection like this himself. Basically, Conquest starts to view Mark as the only person in the universe who can understand or empathize with how he feels, seeing a lot of what he could have been through his interactions with him. Mark has a clear understanding of what it's like to have a bond with another person, something Conquest longed for yet never got a chance to experience it himself, and he recognizes how this bond gives him more strength and willpower to fight. In spite of being enemies, Conquest began to feel some sort of respect for Mark, as a warrior and for having something that made him unique as a Viltrumite. His curiosity for this sort of thing piqued his interest, thinking that maybe Mark would work as a means for him to vent about his frustrations in a way that would give him some kind of therapeutic relief. It is a better alternative than keeping it all bottled up inside, and yet he still feels the need to tell Mark he plans on killing him after the monologue, so his secrets will die along with him. It actually feels like a serial killer toying with their victims because they think they can be most open with someone they're about to kill, a way for them to vent while keeping their secret hidden. It's a really sick method for them to torture and confuse their victims further before the kill. Yet the way they vent their feelings is sincere because it's the most open they can be with another person. Stuff like this really shows how deranged and unhinged Conquest is. The soft, intimate way he whispers into Mark's ear is so skin-crawling and hair-raising in its tone. A very dangerous man that reads like a textbook serial killer confessing to a victim he knows will never tell anyone. He's confessing because he knows he has the power here, with the person listening being choked to death in his hand. And a really clever detail throughout most of the monologue is that the camera focuses on his fake eye. It's highly emblematic of how empty he feels inside. Nothing but a shell tasked with an endless career of death and carnage. It manages to carry so much symbolism, like what he's about to say isn't supposed to be seen or heard coming from him. This side of him needs to be kept a secret, and Conquest is going to make sure it stays that way. But what really makes it more interesting is how this monologue wasn't in the comics. Robert Kirkman himself said that he was hoping to expand on elements he neglected or didn't have time for when he was working on the comics. And so far, he's actually done a pretty good job expanding on the source material. There's actually quite a lot of these additions that add more flavor to certain characters and plot points. Things like Nolan drifting through space while reflecting on his actions, or Adam Eve's home life being explored to add agency to her character. But I think this monologue with Conquest might be the biggest and best one so far. In the comics, he never says anything about himself except his love for battle, even acknowledging that Mark is the first one to challenge him to a fight he genuinely enjoys. It's still very well done, painting him as more sadistic and bloodthirsty compared to other Viltrumites and making him an opposing adversary for Mark. But the show manages to flesh him out even further with this scene. He goes into depth about the fact he's seen as a freak among his own people, and how it made him turn to violence as a coping mechanism. But not only does this flesh out Conquest more, it also adds so many layers to the Viltrum Empire. In the beginning of the video, I went into the lore surrounding their race and how they lost their way when they became conquerors, neglecting their emotions. And Conquest monologue helps to highlight how the Viltrumites can be redeemed as people. It foreshadows their future where living on Earth among humanity exposes them to the love and affection they excluded from their culture for so long. And after being reminded of how these things feel, their entire wall of strength collapses, much like what happened with Nolan. It greatly foreshadows the development of the other Viltrumite characters while not spoiling it for people who avoid reading the comics. It adds to why they are the way they are, trying to keep a facade of absolute power and trying to deny their longing for connections with other people. It highlights the Viltrum Empire's greatest weakness. They secretly want compassion and love but aren't allowed to express that desire, so keeping that bottled up inside causes them stress. Viltrumites aren't simply ruthless beings of duty. They still feel the same emotions that we do, forced to live in a cold culture that only values strength and looks down on compassion. They aren't as powerful as they think they are because of how miserable it is to live this way. What Conquest admits about himself here is probably what every other Viltrumite feels on some level. It actually makes his situation even more sad with how quickly the other Viltrumites shifted their goals. If Conquest wasn't destroyed so mentally, he could have joined them and changed for the better. On the outside, he's the embodiment of what Viltrum thinks it should be, but deep down, he wants more out of life. It also shows how Conquest is the peak of how the Viltrumites suffer because of what they think it means to be a Viltrumite. Under the culture of the Empire, they're only seen as weapons. It's just the way they are now, and it's a really harmful way of life even for their own people. It even highlights how in denial they are because of how the others are scared of him. In spite of having a culture that only values strength and power, Conquest is still too much for them, so they may not hold on to those beliefs as strongly as they do, which is further supported by how fast they change their ways while living on Earth. It adds a lot of depth to the Viltrum way of life while showing its flaws. They neglect their own desires in order to serve the Empire to the point that it drives them mad. And Conquest is an example of what could have fallen the other members of their race. But at the same time, it makes you wonder how Conquest ended up getting singled out among his own people if they all had the same viewpoints as him. Well, it's actually explained during the monologue where he says as he got better and better, they became more weary of him. Because of how more powerful he was among the rest of his people, the Empire saw the most potential within him, so they turned to him the most. But Conquest was subjugated to it so much that he ended up adopting these beliefs in a way that became too literal. He even comments during the fight that he had tendencies that went against the mission, so the rest of the Empire took these as a sign he was unstable and uncooperative. Even in a culture where strength is the only thing that matters, there are people like Conquest who are outcasted because they're too reckless and disobedient. In a sense, he's just a liability they're trying to keep on a leash, which just ends up dehumanizing him further. Conquest being self-aware of all this really hits home how far into the abyss he fell, and his attitude towards Mark makes it more creepy. The fact that Conquest isn't even a nickname or a title given to him for his accomplishments is really haunting when you think about what that means for him. He doesn't even have an identity. He's just an attack dog for the Empire, with no purpose beyond being a tool for destruction. Unlike Nolan, who was given a more subtle mission with the freedom to adapt and build a secret life, Conquest is only given one objective: take control of a world by any means necessary. They don't even see him as a person, just a machine programmed to follow instructions. He's pretty much a prisoner of this role. He wants to be more than a destroyer, but the Viltrumite ways are so ingrained into his being that to actively seek anything beyond his namesake is impossible. And really, how could it be, when you spend thousands of years doing the same thing over and over, being isolated and only regarded as an asset instead of a living, feeling being? By the time you find out you're capable of things other than destroying, how do you express that to people? How do you go about showing them the many other things you can do? Well, you don't, because you can't. In the comics, Conquest gave us the impression that he's nothing but an attack dog, or a war-hungry veteran, but the show takes the time to consider how he reflects on the idea that everyone just assumes he loves what he does. This new scene gives a whole new perspective to his character, warped by his circumstances and his society. Conquest does enjoy ruthlessness and combat, but he hates being shunned by his own people for being overboard with it. But he can't help that because of how deeply he was indoctrinated, and they still manage to make him even scarier, because in spite of how isolated he feels, he chooses to embrace it. This has been his life for so long that he just succumbed to it, accepting that he's trapped and there's no way out. He claims that he's capable of more, but they never see it, which means that he knows what life was like before the shift in power. Maybe there was a time when Viltrum had things like compassion and love, but it was slowly programmed out of them. Conquest was forced to leave that simple life behind, having all these things forced out of him as he was rebuilt into a weapon. A part of him feels nostalgic for those old days, longing for a purpose other than enslaving worlds. He still longed for camaraderie, but because of their opinion on empathy and weakness, this is the best he can be. He was trained to believe he's not supposed to have these things, so now he only finds solace in the people he's killing. In spite of his love for combat, he still feels bitter and alone as a result of what defines him. The fact that he calls the things he does atrocities shows that he knows that the Empire is evil. It almost feels like he was forced to do terrible things for eons knowing it was wrong and became insane over time. It actually feels warranted that he dislikes how his fellow Viltrumites are scared of him because that life was forced on him. Maybe he thought he would gain respect by being their best soldier and succeeding the most in conquering other worlds. But the sad thing is, the opposite happened. He spent so much time trying to impress his fellow Viltrumites through all these killings only to get nothing out of it. So now his only solace is the killing themselves. He may have been more like Nolan when he was younger, knowing what it's like to have people in your life who respect and care about you. So having these things taken away from him feels really unfair to him. When he excels, it makes his isolation worse, which only worsens his downward spiral into madness. No one was strong enough to catch up to him, or maybe he evolved his combat skills too quickly. He says that he was never given a real name, but what if he was? He could have had a different identity before the Purge, something that was stripped from him in the new regime. And now, being Conquest is the only thing he has any memory of. All he remembers is the carnage that came with his success. So he ended up embracing this new identity, only passing this knowledge to those he deems worthy. I talked before about how he only said these things to Mark because he has some sort of respect for him. But that respect also seems to come from envy, wanting what he has but having it out of his reach. So trauma dumping on him is the best he has. A half-blooded Viltrumite that he respects the strength of is the best person in his eyes to share his pain with. And since he's about to kill him, he never has to worry about anyone else knowing. It's actually really cruel to both of them, not just Mark. For Conquest only opening himself up to someone who will soon be dead, forever lacking connection with another sentient being. Understanding that he could have been different, that he didn't have to be a monster, and after the battle he'll just go back to his crushing loneliness. It's really disturbing and sad, but also really in character for him, only exposing his emotional vulnerability to someone he's about to kill, someone who will never tell his secret. That's not vulnerability in the sense of trauma. In actuality, it's vulnerability akin to confessing your feelings to someone. He tells Mark that he believes he's special, but only because he can torture him as he pleases. He's not allowed to torture and kill the other Viltrumites. He was so convinced that Mark was about to die that he didn't care about revealing his biggest insecurity. The line of "take it to your grave" is so cold yet so fascinating when you think about what it means. He just opened himself up to reveal his biggest secret because he felt like someone in the universe needed to hear it, but only doing so because he had every intention of making sure that secret never got out. The fact that he told this to Mark shows that he wouldn't say it to anyone else, only to those he deems worthy. So chances are that Mark is the only person he ever confessed these feelings to, but only to alleviate his own pain. It actually makes him more cold and ruthless because his intimacy with Mark was used as a drug, feeling that rush he hadn't felt in eons. But after Mark dies, Conquest will be alone again, forced to resume an empty existence. The dissonance of Conquest giving this speech while choking Mark to death really elevates this scene to another level. The sheer despair and exhaustion in his voice as he admits how being at the top of the Viltrum Empire is lonely makes you feel just the slightest bit of pity for him, because you recognize why he would confess this to Mark. He envies him because he sees something the rest of the Viltrumites would view as a weakness. That's what brings out the honesty in this speech. He thinks of Mark as his only real friend since the Purge. Everything he does to Mark, from taunting him to causing him stress by attacking Oliver and Eve, was all done as part of his plan to keep the fight going as long as possible. Even during the speech he delivers the information slowly because he wants to spend more time with Mark, like he wanted him to process what he was telling him. He might have been hoping that Mark would give a response to everything he said, and when he got no response he simply decided to finish him off. Even in the face of someone he respected, he's only met with silence, further proving how alone he truly is. Conquest isn't hurting from isolation, he's dead from it. He enjoys the fights because it's the only interaction he can have with someone, which is probably why he trauma dumps before finishing the deed, because he never had a victim who lasted this long. But he's still just a corpse when it comes to any semblance of sanity. That's what makes it so sick. He's only allowed to open up to someone who's about to die, because no living being would care about his situation, wanting to cry but realizing how pointless it would be because no one in the universe would care. It shows that everything that made Conquest a legendary Viltrumite is exactly what makes him so miserable. Their culture starves its individuals of any love or affection, and Conquest is a mascot of that culture, an unstoppable force but a lonely, broken soul. Conquest confessing all of these things was basically a final farewell to Mark, a sick, twisted thank you for hearing him out before the kill. That was probably another thing he was thankful to Mark for, someone to confess his reality to. Imagine all the crazy violent things he did he had to suppress. How many thousands of years he may have gone without having a real conversation with someone. He was basically admitting that he knows how horrible he is and how he could have been so much more but was never allowed to be, suppressing it until he became insane and detached from reality, with his mind too far gone to come back, knowing that he'll be nothing but an attack dog for the rest of his life. That is a really horrifying way to live, and it's made even scarier by how willing he is to accept it. He understands the value of connecting with other people but chooses senseless carnage anyway, which ends up making him feel more evil. Unlike the comic version where he's just a psycho, this version of Conquest is much more professional about his sadism. They added a nihilistic aspect to him by confiding in how trapped he felt and deciding he might as well make the most of it. He also wanted to thank Mark for providing him with a fun time, trying to bond with him over the course of the battle. The way he speaks to him gives you the impression that he pretty much has the mindset and emotional maturity of a child. He quietly and embarrassedly confessed to Mark that he has no friends, like a kindergartner, except he's in the middle of beating him to death. Because killing people to him is what recess is to that kindergartner. He wants to feel validated and appreciated by the people around him, while also acknowledging the very reason that'll never happen. But in a strange way, he sounds like he's questioning that statement as he says it. He says they think I'm unstable as if he's trying to tell himself, no, I'm not unstable. There's so many interesting layers in how this speech is written and delivered, making him a lot more interesting to think about than his comic version. It's the perfect characterization for someone who only knows how to express themselves through violence. Killing another person is the closest Conquest gets to true intimacy, which is why he feels comfortable about sharing the shameful truth about his loneliness with Mark, because there's nobody else he can tell. Shunned, feared, and miserable. No camaraderie, no real connections, not even any real respect. And the only person he feels comfortable being vulnerable around is a teenager he's about to murder. It makes him into a killing machine who isn't necessarily mindless, just using his love of murder as a coping mechanism. And the fact that he whispers this confession like he's nervous that someone other than Mark will hear it just really adds to it. Despite the fact he should theoretically be the highest representative of their values, he's just a pawn in a game of chess. No matter how many lesser life forms he kills or conquers, and no matter how much he tries to represent their values in hopes of validation, he still can't escape that pit of emptiness in himself. Because in the Viltrum Empire, no one really loves or even likes each other. It's all about proving how strong you are. It's even shown during his final exchange with Mark. Conquest doesn't beg for mercy or even curse him for outsmarting him to get the win. He just tells him that he takes the good with the bad, accepting his defeat with all the destruction and pain he caused because he sees the reality that death is part of his mission. The way he expresses himself shows exactly why Nolan ended up changing. He liked how Earth didn't make him feel like a disposable pawn, and he finally came to realize that this was the life he truly wanted. It also makes for a really strong contrast between Season 1's finale and this one. Nolan tries to convince Mark that the mission is all that matters, while Conquest tells him how much he hates it and why it gave him no real meaning as an individual. Even the living embodiment of Viltrum's destructive and violent ways felt like he was missing something, and Mark helped him feel less empty even for just a small speck of time. Mark revitalized a sense of purpose in his life by reinvigorating something inside of him that he hadn't felt for the longest time. Someone that he actually cared about, even if it was in his own messed up way. For the first time, you can see an almost human emotion on his face as he makes his confession. A sense of genuine sadness before reverting to primal rage. This is how you know how honest and sincere he is during the speech, which just makes it so much more horrifying to think about. Conquest isn't saying these things to manipulate Mark or make him feel inferior. He's saying them because it's true. He's so old and tired at this point, but still trying to embrace who he is now. Killing people is all he can do now. Aware of what he's doing, but at the same time, too stuck in his ways to change anymore. He's not telling a single lie while literally strangling someone to death and delivering a cold serial killer speech about how isolating it is to murder people for fun. This really was some sort of twisted therapy session with his victim, the closest he's ever gotten to actually interacting with another living being. This is easily one of the greatest speeches from a villain I've ever seen. In a minute and a half, this guy gets more depth and character development than a lot of villains get in an entire season, giving us a peek into the sadistic mind of a mass murderer who was rendered insane from his ordered massacres. It's also a lot more disturbing for a villain who would normally give some kind of grandiose speech or monologue, instead, quietly whispering their most personal vulnerabilities as a way to seal the deal to make sure they don't live to tell about it. Trauma dumping to your enemy and being vulnerable like that shows a tiny bit of mercy to give them hope, but immediately telling them to take their secrets to the grave is so unsettling. It even paints his relationship with other Viltrumites in a scary new way. If Conquest was part of any other race of people who didn't have a government based on strength and dominance, he would have been viewed as a serial killer. But because he's part of the Viltrum Empire, he didn't have to hide his sadism from anyone. Or at least he didn't think he had to. It wasn't until they started ostracizing him that he figured out it was abnormal. It actually really pushes empathy on him. Shunned for being too good at mass murder and forced into a life of solitude for his people who now reject him. One of the most gripping sentences in this speech is how he simply utters,
"Some days I feel so alone I could cry, but I don't. I never do. Because what would be the point? Not a single person in the entire universe would care."
What makes this hit so hard is how painful it is for him. The other Viltrumites already distanced themselves from him, and everyone else he's ever met has either been killed or enslaved by the Empire. He literally has no one to talk to or understand his situation, and no one would ever want to understand him because of his wicked nature. This is one of the reasons why he loves battle, because it's the only time he actually gets to feel something. It really shows how depressing his life is, being isolated and alone and only used to commit atrocity after atrocity with no thanks for it. Not only is this a chilling insight on how cruel Viltrum is, but it's also an interesting switch from how he is for the rest of the episode. episode. Most of the time, Conquest is really bestial and unbothered by the bloodshed, but here he's venting about how that way of life made him feel empty inside. It adds so much psychosis to his character, and his background makes it so much more layered in detail. A Viltrumite who's old and gray shows how this has been slowly boiling in him for thousands of years. Even when there's only 50 pure-blooded ones left, he still ends up being isolated and detached from his own people. The idea that they could be on the brink of extinction but still want nothing to do with him only elevates his loneliness. It presents a new and conflicting layer to him where it's tragic but also heinous that someone turned out the way he did. And it also makes for a really good contrast between him and Nolan. Conquest has considered crying but saw it as a weakness, while Nolan brought himself to tears after being exposed to genuine affection.
They were weak, short-lived, barely a species. They shouldn't matter to me.
That doesn't mean they should die.
You don't understand! I'm not supposed to feel this way! How is this better?
This is how you should have felt on Earth.
The sincerity and vulnerability in the speech recontextualizes the entire fight. This is the only time that Conquest ever gets to feel happy, and knowing that it has to come to an end for his mission makes this happiness short-lived. So he nihilistically reverts to his old self as he strangles Mark. The existential dread was really palpable because he wasn't even expecting this when he first arrived. He didn't think that Mark would provide him with so much joy. It makes him more fleshed out not just because it shows how he really feels about the Viltrum Empire, but because it shows how he could have been a better person if his circumstances were different. Sometimes having a villain showing humanity like this can deepen how warped and messed up they are, because it demonstrates how they're actually a thinking, feeling person who still chose to be like this. That's what ultimately separates Conquest from the other Viltrumites. He knows that they're not helping anyone, so he doesn't care about spreading their glory. He's also aware that he's been isolated for being too murderous even by their standards. He knows what's wrong with his life, what's missing, and that he's capable of more. And yet he doesn't give up on this life because it's all he has at this point. Conquest's mind at this point has been broken down so completely that he's simply beyond help. He swallowed his feelings towards the reality he was trapped in and allowed it to eat away at him and erode him from the inside. He did this for so long that by the time he finally chose to talk to someone about it, it was too late. He realizes that he can't escape what he is and what he was molded to be. So now he uses destruction and murder to ease his isolation. In the end, he chooses to be this way. That's way worse than thinking you're doing the right thing. He's lonely, but he fully understands himself to be a villain. He knows that it's horrible yet still chooses to have fun this way, because he knows he doesn't deserve otherwise after all the evil things he did. Knowing that he's capable of change but chooses not to is so sinister and cruel, because he sees no point in it after how he's been treated and forged. As willing as he is, he knows his allegiance and thus surrenders to his given destiny, because it's the only thing he remembers about his life. He doesn't even have a soul anymore. He doesn't have any empathy or emotion. All he is now is an empty husk suited for one purpose: conquest. The most important thing about this scene is that it's not being done as a means to make him sympathetic or redeemable, as he's obviously neither of these things. Instead, it's done to explain his actions and the systematic flaws of the Viltrumites isolating their emotions. Ultimately, he's the most depraved and cruel member of his race, but he's also the only one who knows how monstrous he is and how empty his life is. The Viltrumites are fundamentally just people trying to convince themselves they're gods of war, and they push Conquest to be a god even among them. In spite of being an irredeemable monster, there's still a sense of tragedy to his character. He became like this because on Viltrum this behavior is normal and encouraged. It also shows how Nolan decided to turn on Viltrum. It's an entire civilization neglecting their emotional needs for entire millennia until they die. It helps to make Conquest a terrible person while making him terrible in a realistic way. Because in essence, he's still a person who feels the same feelings we do while also needing the same needs as us. Growing up in a culture where emotions and bonds with others are considered weak and killing those weaker than you is considered strong. So it actually made sense that he turned into what he is. Not talking to people will eventually make you go crazy, and Conquest is absolutely crazy. It demonstrates how bad people can still feel complex emotions while drawing parallels between him and Mark. Mark keeps himself stable and grounded through his connections with other people, whereas the Viltrumites have isolated themselves because they consider those things weak. Conquest was formed by the society he was born into, and not just by their culture, but also by the literal calling they had. The Viltrum Empire made a huge effort to mold him into a beast, the epitome of what they think Viltrumites should be, and yet he admits that it made him disposable. The speech he gives to Mark is for no one's benefit except his own, because this is just something he had on his mind for a long time and never told anyone. Because like he said, what would be the point? He knows what he is and what he enjoys, but he's also aware that he could be doing so much more and hates the fact that he can't. And out of all the people in the universe, Mark is the only one he told because he's the only one who made him cut loose. So he's willing to give him a piece of his mind, something that he kept to himself for a very long time. They made him more psychologically complex and interesting while remaining irredeemably evil, which is absolutely perfect for him. You can understand where he's coming from and still recognize he's an unhinged psycho. The fact that he's choosing that moment to show any sort of vulnerability is creepy, and it fits with him using Mark as a plaything. It doesn't give Conquest sympathy, rather it gives him empathy. There's something you can empathize with about his plight in a vacuum, but he still chose this life as much as it chose him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be reveling in it as much as he does. The only reason he told Mark was because he thought he had power over him, only choosing to open up to someone he plans on killing. There isn't a single sympathetic thing about that. It's cowardice for not being able to look his own insecurities in the face, letting himself keep causing problems as Viltrum's attack dog. Conquest is irredeemable and had to go, but the tragedy is that he could have been better or similar to Nolan. Then again, we don't really know anything about his life before the regime. It helps to make his character more ambiguous. Was he always just a crazy maniac? Or did he become crazy from what the Empire did to him? The only thing you can do for him at this point is put him down and make sure there are people from the Empire you can still save from this fate. There may be other Viltrumites like Nolan who can be changed for the better, and convince them to help stop the war. The show doesn't excuse the billions of people Conquest killed just because he's sad. The purpose of his speech is to show how emotion and connecting with other people isn't a weakness, but a strength. Conquest is a monster, a product of the Viltrumite way of life and the perfect embodiment of their philosophy, realizing how it left him with nothing except that simple purpose, a truly sad existence. This is how Mark ultimately won over Conquest, his emotional connections with other people, because it's better to fight alongside others than doing it by yourself. A weakness the Viltrum Empire doesn't recognize and ended up feeding into Conquest so much, it led to his downfall. It actually gives Mark a window into something he needed to know about Viltrum, how they're still feeling people that are forced to live under a regime that denies their actual needs, something he can help change about them in future events in the story. It's too late for Conquest, but there might still be a chance for the others. Everything about this addition to the story was incredible, making an already exhilarating episode of the show more pulse-pounding while leaving you with something to think about. It makes Conquest a lot more compelling than he previously was, while brilliantly setting up important storylines yet to be adapted from the comics. It really does give off that refreshing feeling we were left with in Season 1. Something truly unique and original while experimenting with the superhero genre. Season 4 certainly has a lot to live up to, and we have a lot of time to prepare for it. But until that time comes, we can always revisit the first 3 seasons. With a lot of enriching content to go through to refresh our taste in Invincible, it'll certainly be interesting to see what comes next.